Hello, hi everyone, back again. And now we're going to be heading into our second session of the morning. It's going to be a webinar delivered by Danny Attias, the Chief Digital and Information Officer at Anthony Nolan. In this session, Danny is going to be discussing three main components. He will be discussing the three layers of digital, as in the three ways we can understand and approach digital, how to have an evergreen strategy, and he will also be discussing digital literacy. Danny will cover what each of these components are, why they're important to delivering your strategy, and how they influence and interact with one another. You will leave the session with an understanding of how this approach will enable you to deliver the best digital experiences. You'll also learn what you'll need to do to maintain this in the long run. I just wanted to add again for the second session that there will be a live Q&A with Danny in person, and you can submit questions using the Q&A function on your screen. Once again, it looks like the sort of two overlapping chat bubbles. I would also like to encourage you to use the chat function so you can talk to other people joining the session and see how they're finding it. And remember, within the Q&A, if you see a question that's especially interesting to you, you can upvote it, and then that will be the first or the second one that I'll put to Danny in person shortly after 10 this morning. So I'm now going to head over to Danny's presentation, and our Q&A will start around sort of 10:15 or so. Okay, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Danny Attias. I'm the Chief Digital and Information Officer at Anthony Nolan. I'd like to take this opportunity to talk to you about the key components in delivering your digital strategy. Now, this is hopefully going to be relatively straightforward and relatively simple. I don't think any of us have got the energy and the capacity to just sit there and stare at the screen and deep dive into really complex topics. But if there are things that you want to know that I've not touched upon, then do please put it into the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens and line up a question, and I'll be answering questions at the end of the presentation. And by all means, all the way through the presentation, you're welcome to put anything into the chat window as you go along if you want to share some of your experiences or make any observations. So, I am from a charity called Anthony Nolan. Hopefully you have heard of us. We're a 45-year-old UK-based charity. We were the world's first stem cell register. And we exist so that we can help hospitals around the world find stem cell donors for patients in need of a stem cell transplant. Normally that's blood cancer sufferers, but there are other conditions that might need that kind of treatment. The register was set up many years ago. We were the world's first, but there are now over 100 over the world. And a lot of what we do is collaborate with all of those other registries to help them. In terms of what we do every day from a business perspective is we do run the stem cell register. So we have people applying to join the register, but we also help find the stem cell donors and facilitate the collection of cells and transport them. We also run our own laboratories, our own research division, patient support, and we have an entire facility dedicated to collecting umbilical cord blood and processing and storing those samples. So we're relatively complex in terms of the number of different business units that we have, and that kind of leads into the responsibilities that I have as CDIO and delivering support for all of those functions. So as I said, I'm Danny Attias. This is a picture of the last time I saw real human beings in the flesh, and that was at last year's Charity Digital Be More Digital conference, which was a few minutes before national lockdown started. There was antibacterial wash everywhere, and people were elbow bumping each other. But it was really great. If anyone who was there will know this, it was a really great conference. It was nice to have been part of that. I joined a panel talking about inclusion as a token white male on that panel, and really proud of the fact that we have more than 50% of our developers are female, and we try and promote as much ethnic diversity, gender diversity, and cognitive diversity within the team as we can. The one other thing I'll mention, I'm relatively, not that new, but relatively new to the not-for-profit sector. I joined Anthony Nolan in 2016, but before that I worked in retail with the John Lewis Partnership, and also for professional services, businesses and agency work as well. So I've got a reasonably balanced view from different industries and not just from the not-for-profit sector. One other thing I'll mention, because I like to mention it a lot while I still can, is that I was listed at the top of the CIO 100. That makes me and my team and the whole organization very proud. But I think what's worth calling out on that is we've got someone from the charity sector topping the list of CIOs in the UK. And I just think that's a real boost for our standing as a sector and the level of maturity and capability that we have across the organisation. So that's enough about me. A little bit more about, this is Anthony Nolan's strategy. I'm not going to go into it in a huge amount of detail, but clearly, if you are thinking about developing your digital strategy, you have to start with your organizational strategy. You have to have a clear view on what your organizational strategy is. The organizational strategy also needs to reflect your digital ambitions. So you'll see here at the bottom of the screen that data and digital, we call it digital know-how, are core fundamental parts of our overall organizational strategy. That's really important. But ultimately, we are here for patients. Anthony Nolan serves patients, and it's to give patients the best chance of survival and the best quality of life. That's it. That's what it boils down to. So we need to be clear in everything that we do, technology and otherwise, that we are working towards those goals. If we're not working towards those goals, then we're kind of missing a trick. So that's really important. Never lose sight of that. Don't just implement technology for the sake of implementing technology. Now I'm going to talk about three specific things. One is, what is digital? Feels a bit odd in 2021 that we're still asking the question, what is digital? But I think people have different interpretations of what it is. And I know that in the first 2 or 3 years of my current role, I was asking that question a lot, and I did not have any answers. I genuinely did not know what people meant when they kept saying digital, because people were using it in different ways and in different guises. So I'll just take you through my interpretation of the word digital and how I use it as well. I'll then touch upon our Evergreen Strategy. It's a core part of how we build and how we implement technology, but it requires a real change in mindset. The intention is that what you create becomes sustainable. And I mean sustainable in the sense that it's always fresh, it's always new, and it's always delivering to the organization. And then finally, I'll touch a little bit on digital literacy, and not just for the technology team, but for your organization as a whole. If you put all of your eggs into one basket and you invest all of your tech know-how, digital know-how, just in your technology function, then that makes really hard work for yourself, but it also is hugely inefficient, because you've got 90% of your organization waiting to be led and waiting to be shown. So those are the three areas I'm going to touch upon. So let's start with, what is digital? And my background is infrastructure, so I'm going to start with infrastructure, but it also underpins everything that you do. It's very difficult to do anything without getting your core infrastructure right. And when I say core infrastructure, I mean your PCs, laptops, networks, but also the tools, the productivity suites, the Google Workspace, the Office 365, that type of technology. I think when people generally talk about digital nowadays, they're probably not talking about core infrastructure. But often when you look at their digital projects and their digital plans, they will talk about these things. They'll talk about that migration to Office 365 or Google Workspace, and they'll talk about moving their server stack into the cloud. I think once you've done that migration, it's easy to think that everybody's already done their migration, but not everyone has. I think the pandemic that we're in now has probably accelerated a lot of those migrations, and hopefully more more people than not, more organizations than not have done that migration. So core infrastructure can be a bit boring, but if you don't get it right, then people will tend to fixate on it. And also your organization cannot effectively communicate and collaborate with each other reliably and securely if you haven't got that layer right. So I wouldn't class core infrastructure as digital, but it often does form the foundation of your digital project. So the next level is your business applications. These are the general tools that you've either built or bought to keep your business running, whether they be your finance system or your CRM or specialist bits of technology. We're now getting a little bit more digital here. Again, totally appropriate for that to be as part of your digital strategy. Your business applications need to be ideally developed with a digital mindset. If you acquire them and you design them with a very traditional mindset, then the risk is you're not taking the advantage of having fresh, always improving, always evolving, wonderfully integrated technologies in play. These things are really important as well. When I started at Nolan, we had already started the process of replacing much of our business applications, but there was still a lot more work to be done. And talking about the next level of digital, well, it's really difficult to do if you don't have the data right, if you don't have the core tools right for your staff, and on top of that, the core infrastructure. So then the third layer, the kind of final layer, is your traditional digital. It's customer facing. It's the stuff that your customers get to engage with directly, that they can digitally interact with. So I think that's generally what people are talking about when they say digital. However, the other two can somewhat get absorbed. I mean, they're necessary steps in getting there, but they can also be a bit of a distraction and not focusing on that. They also traditionally would be your website, and then slightly more recently your digital marketing, but there is so much more beyond that as well. So I think that's another important part. Often charities will have digital teams, but those teams will be potentially largely focused on digital marketing and largely focused on the website. And it's really about thinking about what digital services you can provide to your customers, to your beneficiaries, to your supporters, however you classify that external audience, and going beyond that. So it's that point where you're thinking about that space of how you deliver your core services to your supporters and beneficiaries that go beyond just the landing space of your website, the back-end business applications, and the core infrastructure. I think the final thing I'll say around this area is also these largely or historically require a different set of skills to deliver. However, you can use more digitally focused, more agile, more modern skills to deliver them all. So your core infrastructure, for example, will largely be delivered from an infrastructure team. Their bread and butter will be networks and there'll be servers. But that skill set and that knowledge and that experience is slightly different when you're starting to use cloud-based solutions, both in server cloud solutions, as well as the tools, the Office 365 type tools. So it's worth being mindful of that. Again, your business applications might take a very traditional business analysis route, a procurement route, or an in-house development route. But again, they might be focused more on the function than on the customer. By the time you get to that top layer, then the scene changes completely. And at this point, you're really starting to think about the customer view. You're thinking about the customer experience, the customer journey, and the benefit to the customer. And then you work your way back to what you build and how you build it. So there are different approaches in how you do that. But I think in the same way that these are fundamental foundation layers, there are also layers of maturity as you, your team, and your organization grow. And rest assured, it's just as important that the rest of your organization grows with you and not just your core technology team. We'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, so that's the first bit covered off. Again, throw in some stuff into the Q&A and I'll be able to answer some questions after this presentation. And do share your experiences in the chat along the way. I would say subscribe, but unfortunately we're not on YouTube. Okay, so Evergreen Strategy. I was doing this before I realized it had a name, but I remember being asked when I was laying out my ambitious plans a few years ago by a finance director, saying, well, hold on, you want to spend all this money doing all this stuff, but what's going to stop us having to do it all over again in 5 years or in 7 years, replacing, when we got this, whatever, X system, finance system, 7 years ago, we were told it will solve all our problems, it'll be the latest and greatest, and it kind of didn't really deliver. And now we're talking about having to replace it all again. That was really alien to me. I couldn't understand, because I hadn't had that experience, I couldn't understand why we were talking in that way. And that's because I believe in an evergreen strategy in everything that you do. And so by evergreen strategy, boiling it down, what I mean is that if it's worth building, implementing, or buying, then hopefully it's worth maintaining. And I don't mean the bare minimum paying your maintenance and maybe doing some patching every year, but I mean keeping that solution fresh and true to the purpose to which you implemented it all the time. So a simple way of looking at it is, you would expect on day 1 or maybe day 100 after it's been delivered, it's going to be really good and it's going to be really delivering. Now, with a traditional implementation, you might expect at the beginning of year 3 or at the beginning of year 5, it might be a little bit tired. It might be getting onto its last legs. We might be thinking about retiring it and replacing it. So within Evergreen Strategy, that's not true. Within Evergreen Strategy, at the beginning of year 3, at the beginning of year 5, that thing that was worth implementing in the first instance is just as fresh, just as relevant, and just as good. Now, that doesn't happen because you wish it. That happens because you invest in it. You get to the point where your organization, your subject matter experts, your finance team understand that if it's worth spending X on implementing this solution, then it's worth spending 20% of that every single year, making sure that it's continuously improved, it's continuously upgraded. Now, the more as a service your solution is, be it software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, but the more as a service or cloud-based your solution is, the easier some of that is. We will always tend to go with a software as a service if we possibly can, or services in the cloud, so platform as a service, if a software as a service isn't an option, because we then don't have to think about patching, security, and regular upgrades, because that's just part of the package. But even if you don't have that, it's really important to keep on top of that process. And I don't mean just in terms of security and upgrades from the manufacturer. I mean, it's a case of looking at what you have and saying, is it still fit for purpose? Now, fundamentally, that is a mindset shift. It's a big mindset shift in your finance team and in your business team. It means your business team are an extension of that agile delivery, or however you want to describe it, because they are responsible for ensuring that things continuously improve all the time, whether you're working in sprints or otherwise. So that's a basic principle of an evergreen strategy. It means that what you put in is worth keeping, and if you're using it, it's worth going on. If you get to a point and you say, well, maybe it's not worth it, then decommission it, take it down. We're just starting a process at the moment where we are taking a platform that we implemented 4 years ago, and right here, right now, it is absolutely fresh. I mean, it is absolutely brilliant. It is delivering incredible value, and we're just starting to replace it. And we're replacing it not because it's old and it's tired and it's not really delivered. It has delivered every single day from the day that we implemented it. But the shape of it, the structure of it that was right at the time is no longer the most appropriate fit for our digital strategy, our technology strategy. So we're going to change it. It's going to take a lot of effort. And it's taken a little bit of time for the organization, and now they get it and they're really excited about it. And I'm specifically not mentioning what the product is at the moment because we have to talk to vendors, but they understand that we're going from good to great. You know, we are taking something that is really good right now and has served us well, into something that we can interact with in a slightly different way that will allow us to be more dynamic and be more agile, and it will better fit our new infrastructure or core application set moving forwards. So sorry, that was a bit vague because I didn't talk about exactly what it is, but in about 6 months, I will be happy to talk about that project. Everyone going into it knows it's going to be a lot of hard work, but also knows that it's worth it. So that's it on Evergreen Strategy. Any observations, pop them in the chat. Any questions, put them in the Q&A window. So digital literacy. I have borrowed this slide, and I think it's being used really well by I believe it's the Royal College of Nursing, so I shan't take any credit for this whatsoever. And this is just more about a kind of an image to hold your eye if you're looking at my image. So what we're talking about here is core capabilities, core competencies, but not just your technology team. So you might be doing agile training, you might be doing Microsoft certifications, you might be running apprenticeships for your developers, you might be starting to upskill your data analysts. I use those examples because they're all things that we've done. But what about the rest of the organization? There's no point developing this core set of capabilities just in your core technology team or your digital function if the rest of the organization don't really understand it. So I'll give you some examples. So one example is collaboration. Okay, so you've got these great tools from Microsoft or from Google, and courtesy of COVID, we all know how to use Teams and Zooms a lot better than we did. So thank you for that, COVID, and thank you for nothing else. But these things are really important. So hopefully your organization has discovered some really exciting brainstorming tools, post-it tools that you're able to use while people are working remotely. It's about getting the rest of the organization used to that. So let me give you an example of Agile. Okay, so you can take your developers and your business analysts and your Scrum Masters and you can do some loads of Agile training. But at the end of the day, if the subject matter experts, if the people in the business, if the people who are coming to the demos, if the people who are involved in the testing don't really understand what you're doing or why you're doing it, other than it's called Agile, then you're going to hit a bottleneck every step along the way. You're going to be running as efficiently as you practically can. Hopefully that's becoming increasingly more efficient. But then once you start to engage the rest of the business, then you might have an issue of, we haven't got time. Can you schedule this in advance because we need to make time available? Or can I get back to you in a month's time? Or can we have a meeting about it? You know, all of those things are going to take an agile development and stagger them to a blinding standstill. So you really want to extend those capabilities and that understanding to an appropriate level across your organization. So that's one example. Another is about collaboration, which I've already talked about, and that's really key for everybody. But another one hugely important is data. So yes, absolutely, you're going to have some data analysts or people with the word data in their job title. And I think we have historically had every job title with the word data in it possible across the whole organization. And how we organize that is another seminar. But there are lots of people who are handling data day in, day out. There are lots of people who are collecting data, and I'm not talking about the data privacy side of things. And then they're trying to interpret it, or they're running Excel spreadsheets and so on. So it's not about saying, I've got 5 people on a data fellowship apprenticeship, and they've now learned Python and machine learning, if you've got 300 people in your organization. It's about making sure that everybody who handles data or who uses reporting has a basic level of literacy. It means that that slightly smaller group, but still reasonably large, of people that are actively using reporting and trying to extract information out of it have got a higher level of competency. And then you've got your pinnacle. You've got the people who are learning about data lakes and machine learning and artificial intelligence. You're not expecting everybody across the organization. So we haven't done this yet. We are just starting to work on it. This is my highest priority for the coming year, is to really embed a level of digital literacy across the organization. The fundamental intention is that the vast majority of people have access to a foundation level of understanding around collaboration. We already do that for information security and data privacy, of course, but how to get the best use of their laptop, how to get the best use of their Office client or their Office collaboration software, how to get the best use of reporting, and as we move towards it, more insight as well. And then you've got your middle level, which are going to the next level of understanding, and then finally the top level. I think with the top level, the gold standard or level 3, whatever you want to call it, then I'd really encourage you to look at apprenticeship programs if you haven't already done so. That's a huge area, very cost effective, but that's a great way of taking a number of days worth of training and stretching it over a period of time, where they can get coaching and they can learn really while they're on the job, and they can learn with your organizational problems and making that part of their coursework. So apprenticeship programs for that real high level, maybe something that's more self-learning driven, and there's a lot of products out there for the middle level. And maybe for the foundation layer, it's a case of using your intermediates and your experts to help deliver that learning, because that helps them learn it even better. But really the purpose of this is to say, put the priority of digital literacy at the core of your digital strategy. It's going to be really hard to deliver a transformation in digital products and services to your customers if you don't have a core level of digital literacy across your organization. So that's it on digital literacy. So those are the 3 key things I wanted to cover off today. Be clear in what you mean when you say digital. You can mean whatever you want, actually, but just be clear in what that actually means, rather than saying we need to be more digital, we need digital this, or we need a digital team, we need digital budget. Be really specific on that, and then that will help other people understand what digital means, but also help them understand what you mean in that moment in time. Make sure your solutions are sustainable. I think that's really key. Genuinely, if it's worth investing in the first instance, then it is worth investing in continuously to continuously derive value. If you've got to the point where it's not delivering value, then just pull it. Really don't waste time watching it wither and die and drag people down with themselves. And then finally, it's about that digital literacy, but it's about creating a learning culture, whether it's badges and gamification, whether it's self-learning or running seminars or surgeries or drop-ins. There are many different ways of doing it, but just create a learning culture. The one thing that we do, not wonderfully successfully yet, but we will get there, is we try and schedule half a day of personal development time in every sprint for our developers. So 2-week sprint, half a day of personal development. And that means the amount of work that goes into the sprint is reduced. There is a ticket for personal development time. The idea is they put up on a board what they want to learn. They then come back and share that knowledge once they've learned it. But we're not restricting or specifying what they're going to learn specifically. It's difficult to do because people feel, well, I'm not working. So you've got to make sure that the work that you're putting in the sprint, or the load that you're putting onto individuals, isn't so cumbersome that they never get a chance to do it. And that's something that we're struggling with, and we've got to sort out as well. So, time for questions. Over to you.
Hello. Hi, Danny. Thank you
Oh,
so much for joining us today. Thank you for your session. Firstly, I'd like to apologize for mispronouncing your surname. I hadn't realized it was Atius and not Attias, so I'm sorry about
right.
that. I'd also like to thank you for your session. It was very, very interesting, and I'm sure all of our attendees found it as interesting as well, as I've kind of quietly been checking out the chat from time to time. For all of our attendees, if you haven't had a chance to look at the chat function, please do. The conversation is very interesting. And to sort of carry on the conversation, I'm also going to put a couple of questions to you. And our first one has been upvoted by 33 people. So, very popular question here. This one comes from Alice, who asks, can you give any advice on delivering and developing digital strategy to small charities where there are no departments per se or teams of staff, just part-time staff with several different roles? What would you prioritize in terms of delivering digital strategy? Oh, 34 now. Oh, brilliant.
Okay, so thank you for the question, Alice. I think the principles stay the same. Clearly, the amount of resource or the number of people that you need to be able to get the message across to is different. In some cases, it's easier. In some cases, it's harder. I mean, when you say no departments, that kind of fills me with joy. That means no silos, no barriers, no hurdles to overcome. I appreciate that it's not necessarily the case, but um, yeah, fundamentally, I think the principle is exactly the same. It's about making sure that the bits of the organization are joined up, that you know what you're there to achieve, and you agree how you're going to achieve those outcomes and the priorities of them. So I think in principle, it's the same.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And our second question, also very popular, is how do you get buy-in from colleagues who see the digital team as the experts and do not get involved at any stage? And I think this may refer to some of the siloing that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so anonymous attendee could be in my organization or any organization, I think, and that is a massive problem. We had a particular division who just would not engage, full stop. And in that particular scenario, we ended up doing two things. These are not textbook answers here. One was we had to deliver it without them. And of course, they didn't accept or adopt that change, but we had no choice. It was a governance change that had to be done. And then the second approach was not delivering solutions to them and spending the time engaging with them and getting them on board. That particular division is our laboratories division. Eventually came on board, and we were able, through the process of communication and regular demonstration of outcomes through demos, they started coming to the table more, and we started very small, and they could see how their involvement impacted the outcomes, and the more involvement they gave, the better the outcomes became, to the point where they then eventually start to talk about it as their product, their solution, their system. It's a massive problem. We have these problems every day. Every organization does. It requires a lot of perseverance, a lot of communication. It also requires some senior leadership. I think it's quite important that the senior leadership prioritize that involvement through the development of product strategy and outcomes. Otherwise, they'll be focusing more on their day job and their operational thing. This is part of that day job. I mean, last thing I'll say on this is, if you've got an organization of 100 people and 10%, 5% are the digital experts, then you're wasting 90 to 95% of the resource and the opportunity and the knowledge and the experience if it's left to the experts to do the design and create the solution. So it's going to be a very slow process, and it's going to be a massive bottleneck. The more you can invest the time to get those people across and involved, the more resource ultimately, and the better the outcomes you're going to have. So grit, determination, and continuous demonstration of the benefits of their involvement.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's great advice. And I think applicable to so many sort of work situations where you really have to share that sense of value on both parties, then you can kind of work together and sort of cohesively. Um, Thank you for that. And our next question, I think, is probably quite relevant in this time, and it comes from Tracy, who asks, are there any grants available to implement and improve a digital strategy?
I don't know, Tracy. I saw that and I thought that's a good question. So anyone that does know, please post it in there. I would say in the absence of grants, I genuinely don't know, but in the absence of grants, leverage the community. We're ultimately a very non-competitive, supportive community around the charity space, and peer reviews, advice roundtables using the Charity Digital Network is probably a really good way of doing it. And also, looking for goodwill through organizations to do support strategy to get significant discounts, particularly commercial organizations. But I generally don't know about grants, but it would be good to hear from anyone that does.
Thank you. Yes. And for anyone joining today, if you know of anything or anything you'd like to share. Oh, thank you, Sam, who just had a very helpful link pop up in the chat. So if anyone would like an answer, please pop over to Sam's answer. And our next question comes from Vivian, who asks, do you have a separate digital and technology strategy, or are they one and the same?
So I think you can cut it whichever way you want to cut it. We started with a technology strategy nearly 5 years ago, and that was at a point where we didn't know what digital was, and that was really necessary. And there are components in that technology strategy that wouldn't apply to a digital strategy, like designing the mechanism by which you build and deploy laptops, for example. So I think there is definitely a place for a technology strategy. I wouldn't shy away from that, and it's good to keep that under review, the technologies you're using, the tech stack, and the like. But it doesn't take the place of the digital strategy. So I suppose I would say if you have a tech strategy, it doesn't mean you have a digital strategy. If you have a digital strategy, it doesn't mean you don't need a tech strategy. So tech strategy is kind of really focusing on the nuts and bolts and how you build your team, whether you insource or outsource, and what tech stack you're going to have. The digital strategy is really a focus on the organizational strategy and the customer and the outcomes and product and journey. And it's kind of more on that side of things.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay. A slightly similar question comes from Simon, who asks, do you have any advice on highlighting the need to have an integrated digital marketing strategy to senior management?
Yes. I mean, it goes back to what I mentioned a couple of questions ago about getting that senior buy-in. And also we talked to the very first question about silos. That digital marketing strategy needs to not be written in tunnel vision, not focused exclusively on one thing, but has got to join up across the way you digitally engage with all of your customers. Otherwise, you have different bits of your... Ultimately, a customer is engaging with your organization, sees one organization, doesn't care about your internal silos. So it's important that you get that senior management buy-in and think about that end-to-end customer experience, whether it's marketing or it's delivering a service. So I think it's really important to have clear organizational structure, so you know who is responsible for a specific thing. If something's happening, you need to know who's responsible for making sure that happens, but that doesn't mean everything has to happen within that silo. And it's important that you take a matrix approach so that you're joining up across the organization to deliver your outcomes. So it's kind of there's a need for top down for some things, there's a need for across, but ultimately you need the senior buy-in at every step along the way to create that unified experience for your customers.
Excellent. And just sort of anecdotally, I've definitely seen across the sector, and it's true for most organizations, that's when you have that sort of senior buy-in, that's what sort of seems to unite the organization in so many ways, and it's so powerful as well. Great. So thank you for your time, Danny. We're now going to shortly be heading over to our second Energizer break of the morning. Thank you for presentation. And Danny, I believe you will be available within Remo for an extended Q&A for any of our attendees who haven't had a chance to ask a question or would like to ask something else. Please pop over to Remo. You can also use the Remo rooms to network with your peers and speak to other attendees and ask them how they're finding the day so far. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the grants that we mentioned earlier. We will also be running Energizers throughout the day just to give people a break from learning, and you can use this time to get some refreshments. I might refresh my cup of tea and you can soak up the atmosphere. We will shortly be presenting in the Energizer a lightning talk from our sponsors Avast, and then you can head over to Remo to chat to the team. We will also be playing some music from our very talented colleague Nick Wyatt, so some in-house talent for you all. As the morning continues, our third session is due to begin around 25 to 11 if you'd like some timings. And so I'd like to thank you again, Danny, for your time and for joining us. And I will see you all back very shortly. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.